Hello, everyone. Welcome to Indie Feature Friday, leading up to Canadian Independent Bookstore Day on Saturday, August 29th. Penguin Random House Canada is spotlighting a Canadian independent bookstore every Friday at 3 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. I'm Billy-Ray Belcourt, author of A History of My Brief Body, and today I'll be speaking with Hilary Atleo from Iron Dog Books, an Indigenous-owned bookstore and book truck dedicated to bringing low-cost reading to Tsleil-Waututh, Squamish, and Musqueam territories. That's a dog. Before we get to our conversation, I have just a few housekeeping items to touch on. As a reminder, please keep your audio and video muted throughout the session. The chat can be activated at the bottom of your screen, and you can comment along or add reactions as you see fit. If you would like to submit questions for us, you can submit them through the Q&A function that you can activate, again, from the bottom of your screen, and we'll be sure to get to those at the end of this session. Now, with all that, I will now ask for our special guest to join us. Already here, please welcome Hilary Atleo from Iron Dog Books. Firstly, Hilary, it is a pleasure as always to get to chat with you. We've had a few run-ins throughout the years in both your book truck and your shop. And so I wanted to actually begin with the truck, since that's in a sense our beginning. And so I wondered if you could tell me a bit about how that came into being, what you had hoped for it, and years ahead, whether those goals were realized or new goals emerged in the wake of that.
Yeah, the truck is a funny thing. It's not well, that my husband did his PhD at U of A, so we have that in common. Nothing like Edmonton to bring people together. Yeah. And that's where I got started in the book business, because we had moved there for his PhD and I needed a job. So I got a job at a secondhand bookshop on White Ave there. And it was when food trucks were kind of coming to the forefront. And so we decided to, or not decided to, but it was just an idea that came up, wouldn't it be adorable if there was a bookstore that drove around just like a food truck? And then we basically put the idea away and moved around, and we did a bunch of stuff, and he got his PhD, and we had 2 kids, and just a whole bunch of life things happened. And then he got hired at SFU, and when we got to Vancouver, we realized that Vancouver is just absurdly expensive. Probably we should have realized that before we moved to Vancouver. So the only really financially viable way we thought to get started was to start the truck. So that the intention was always just to run as a book truck. It was never to expand. But we got into the truck and we realized pretty quickly we knew winters were going to be hard, but winters are so much harder than we thought they would be trying to be mobile. So in terms of the sense of evolving goals, after the first winter we went through, we determined that the next winter we'd try and do a pop-up store. And if that went well, then we'd try and put them both together. And so now we have the storefront on East Hastings as well.
Totally. And so I know that you were stationed at SFU often. Were there any other places where, you intentionally wanted to bring the book truck to for whatever reason, whether that was lack of access to bookstores or Indigenous bookstores in particular?
Yeah, there were so many. That was the other piece of the truck, is that we live up at SFU. There is the university bookstore there, but it doesn't fulfill that community building function that I expect a good independent to do. Yeah. And we talk about my friend Patricia Massey, who owns Massey Books too, and she is also in a very different neighborhood doing a lot of the things that I think bookshops need to do, which is hosting a lot of events and being a place for people to gather. And owning a retail or a brick and mortar business is so placemaking. You're building a neighborhood in a way that being selling online or something like that. And even for artisans, as an artisan, if you make your work and you sell it online, it doesn't provide placemaking the way having a place that is open 7 days a week with the doors open does. So we thought that the truck could do all of those functions for a whole bunch of neighborhoods, and we thought we could get a regular route, and we thought we could look at kind of high traffic areas like maybe the ferry terminal or Granville Island that didn't have a bookstore to pay the bills and then spend the rest of the time going to do more service work. But it very quickly became super obvious that we couldn't do that because there's no license to operate on the street. Yeah. So.
Yeah.
So the answer is there were lots of places we wanted to bring it. We got to do some of them. Like I really love bringing it out to Tofino and Ucluelet, which we've done a couple of times.
Great.
Yeah, because the Ucluelet doesn't have a full bookshop. They have a secondhand shop that has a shelf of books, which is also, you know, it's serving a function for the community, but it's different than having someone roll in with 8 bookcases.
And so do you plan to continue to go out to these places while also operating the store here in Vancouver?
I hope so. We were 100% planning on continuing to operate the truck as normal, and we're scheduling all of our regular dates, and then we can't operate it during the pandemic because there's no events to bring it to. Right. Yeah. And also it's really small. Like we were looking at the space restrictions and I was like, well, one person can be in, which means I would have to get out for somebody else to shop.
It does complicate things.
Yeah.
But perhaps I can go back to something that you gestured to, which is the community-based function of a bookstore. And I was wondering if you could talk about what it's been like in your particular, in the neighborhood in which the bookstore is, which is on Hastings, and what it's been like to be in that community, and how the community has influenced your bookstore, and perhaps maybe also how, you know, the bookstore has begun to influence the community, if at all, or in any way.
I think we're super lucky because we wound up, we sort of found the right place. Like we're the right bookshop for our community, and it's the right community for us. Like it was kind of like a serendipitous, you know, like if we were on like a retail dating site or something, we were matched. Because it's just the right mix of, there's a lot of Native people who live there. The politics of the people are closely aligned with us. There's a lot of families, and I've always tried to make the shop really accessible. I don't know if you feel like this too, but one of the things that we don't talk about enough with accessibility is how hard it is for parents to go places with their kids, you know, like especially if they're little, or if you have a stroller, all these sorts of things. There's, you know, and of course, people with kids with them, people who bring their kids with them are disproportionately women, and then also they're disproportionately people who don't have childcare, and usually because they can't afford it, you know, like there's all these reasons why people are, and so by creating spaces that aren't kid friendly, you wind up creating a space that lots of people can't access. So that's always been super important to me. And then it turned out that there's just lots and lots of families in the neighborhood we moved into. So I hope that our neighborhood likes us. I have this hypothesis of bookshops that we're always like, so if there was a scale of 0 to 10 of gentrification, we start at a base of like 4. Like bookshops are always 4 gentrified, but we can never get higher than a 6 because we also have like a seedy proletarianism to us.
I love that.
Can I ask you a question about your book?
Totally, go on. Yeah.
Do you think you're very funny?
Do I think I'm funny?
Yeah.
I hope I am. I have been told that I am often unintentionally funny. But
I was wondering about that.
I do try to include some humor in my work.
You have this line where you're like, poetry is certainly, I'm not quoting the line, but basically you say that poetry isn't a novel idea. And I was like, I can't tell if you're being hilarious or not, right. but I will ask my sister, because we talked about how we know each other through all these family connections too. She's like, no, he's funny for sure.
I'm glad to hear that.
Yeah.
Well, I do actually have another question about, I do talk to booksellers, you know, being a writer who travels across the country and who goes to bookstores all the time. But, you know, I seldom have in-depth conversations with them about, you know, their, you know, call it a methodology or, you know, framework, and I assume that booksellers do have these. And so I was wondering if you could tell us a bit about your own like philosophy of bookselling, and particularly as it relates to, you know, the the dire need for Indigenous specific resources and whatnot in the book publishing world in Canada.
Yeah, I think bookselling is a weird thing because it's a virtue business. So there is a sort of a sense, maybe this is where the proletarianism comes in, but like there's a sense that we should do this, out of the goodness of our own hearts. So there is a, which is, I mean, obviously part of why we do it, but there's a scale of people who are like pure business on one end, and then pure heart on the other end. And I definitely I want the business to survive and be able to keep working. So I definitely fall somewhere in between. But in terms of my general philosophy, have you ever read The Princess Bride? Like,
I've not. No.
Oh, it's good. It's worth reading. But when the frame story is that author Goldman imagines that he's taken an old manuscript and he's cut out all the bad parts. So now there's just a good parts version of the story. It's only the good parts, none of the boring bits. And that's kind of how I feel about like my general philosophy for the bookshop. And then the secondary piece of that is that I don't want anything in the store that I have to sell to people. I only want things that people need, so
Great.
If you come in and you're like, I just need a good romance right now, or I like that we're matching you, right person, right time, right book.
Totally.
Yeah. And sometimes you see books that come up and I'm like, I'm going to have to persuade someone to buy that. And I never want to do that. Like, I never want to try and like be like, no, this does fit your need, even if it's not the thing that fits your need. Mm-hmm. So in terms of Indigenous books, because I suspect you agree with me, but we have a problem in non-Indigenous publishing right now. And I would say like specifically in white publishing right now, where there is an appetite for certain narratives, mm-hmm. and those narratives are, selected and published over and over again because of a perception that they'll sell, which leaves behind all of these other narratives that are out there to be told. I think about the play Kamloopa. It's just such a good, happy, funny story. And it's a play, but those sorts of narratives are the things that I think we should be lifting up and being, promoting more. And I think especially if you look at young chapter books for young kids all the way through YA, there's just this ridiculous dearth of anything written. Everything is teaching you about residential school. And I mean, I know that that like Native people are lots of things. We are not this one narrative. Yeah.
Totally. And it's sort of this like vicious cycle because, as writers, as Native writers, we, are paying attention to what sells and, what is commercially successful or institutionally lauded. And then, there's this, perhaps in a lot of us, this like small, fire to that can, grow over time to try to, exist inside those things. And it might be outside of what we would normally do or what we actually want to do, what we know our communities need. But I think, there could be this general sense of, that there's not enough agency to do those things. And I think that, part of how that conversation shifts, how those perceptions change is, by the proliferation of a lot of options, that there's a diversity of voices. And, and I think bookstores is where that can begin, that conversation can shift, where, what you put in front of people changes, what is seen as publishable or sellable. So,
and having Native people, I mean, I know I'm the whitest looking Native person you've ever seen in your life, but having Native people or Black people or queer people running their own shops, where we're putting, like you said, we are literally putting these things in front of people and saying, this is the right book for you right now. So, which means we're actually like making physical, literal space for these ideas to exist and to be successful. It also means that we can torque the narrative. Like the number one Indigenous author that I recommend in the store is Aviak Johnson. Like more than anybody else, I realized, because she has that horror compilation. I think she uses female pronouns. That horror compilation and of short stories that she edited, and then also the YA fantasy trilogy that has 2 out. And so I just find myself reaching for it over and over and over and over again. And I recommend you lots too. I recommend all these other people, but she doesn't ever write about colonization. You know, she writes about being Inuit. And
totally.
I love that.
On a side note, very funny. Also, I met her in 2018. Very funny.
Oh yeah? Totally. What's she like? I want to know all the things. Like, I'm such a fan.
Please spill the tea. No, just so down to earth and so funny. Just very witty and quick on her feet. And I really think she's such an important voice in Native writing generally, but in Inuit literature more particularly. So that's so dope to hear that you are a huge advocate of hers, and I'm sure she would love to hear that too.
Well, and then she publishes with Inhabit. Like I swear, so it's distributed through a warehouse that's close to us. For us, like, that's who we order from. And I always think they must, basically we order cartons of them when they get them in, or like we'll order them in 10s and things like that. Yeah. You know, all of her books, and I think they just must be like, where are all these books going? Like, it's from this small publisher, and they can't keep it in stock hardly, you know. So. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I'm just thinking about, I want to continue a bit more on this track, the structural track, because I think, I once interviewed for a position at a bookstore many years ago, a corporate bookstore, and I was, I had my sort of like, sociologist or anthropologist hat on when I was reading what would unfold in an interview. And there was this sort of like intense commodification of books, where books, didn't necessarily, or like what was valuable about a book was whatever would make money. Yeah. And then, so I think that there's a riskiness there because you risk commodifying the subject matter of the book. And so Indigenous, writing about the trauma of colonization, for example, mm-hmm. Quickly becomes, in our late capitalist world, something that is desirable as an economic object. And I'm wondering, how do you think about these things, and like, do you have ways to combat that, that like formula by which these things become, commodities more than, things to help us live, better, more ethical lives?
There, just recently, whenever I have staff now, it's very fancy. So when I'm training my staff, I'm always telling them that, like, we sell the white sugar of arts products, because it's the same no matter where you get it from. Right. And so there have to be reasons to get it from us. So I think it's funny that you're like, yeah, this is a real thing. And just not in terms of the, what's inside the book in terms of the ideas, but because I think that selecting the ideas, like we were talking about, that takes a lot of skill, and you have to care about it and all these things. But the physical object itself, you can buy it from a big corporate store, you can buy it from online or wherever, and you're going to get the same object. But in terms of the general sort of commodification of the ideas, I think that I see some currents in publishing that are even amongst the big publishers that are trying to move away from that, Yeah. Like I see and maybe the pandemic's enough to push us from late dying capitalism into like genuinely, hopefully the commitment to more publicly funded thing, like just to a different model in our country anyway, or maybe even just in our province. hopefully it's enough to force us to get to a different model. But, I don't know if you know McNally Jackson. It's a giant bookshop. And yeah, it's other than my own, it's my favorite bookshop in the world, obviously. But she just wrote an op-ed, the owner just wrote an op-ed about the increase in their rent, and there is this real issue with how expensive the property taxes are, especially in Vancouver, but everywhere, and how that is fundamentally driving this division in terms of wealth, right? Because they're only people who can afford to lease are people that run giant corporations, so they have other cheaper locations that are subsidizing the ones in the expensive, and it's just the death of the independent Main Street. And I think so I bring up McNally Jackson because I think, like, if it can happen to them, where their lease can come up and it can triple and they say we can't afford to keep this storefront, then it can happen to any of us, and we need to work collectively to try and create a different system that allows these sort of I really don't want to use the word diverse, but like a whole variety of narratives to proliferate, right? Instead of just, like you're saying, we can afford to have multiple stores because some of them are cheap, but everything is about the business, as in everything is about just the book that you can sell the most of. I was reading that large corporate store's financial reports recently because I'm a giant nerd, and they were talking about how they had a down year because there wasn't a big hit. And I was like, who stocks a bookshop? Like, you need one book to make all of your money. But that's how they do, right? That's why the indies are surviving, is because we don't, like, for me, ordering a lot of a new book that I'm not familiar with is ordering, oh, this is embarrassing because we're really small, but it's ordering, I'm like, I'll try 5, maybe I can sell it. Yeah.
Totally. One more question, which is, what are your hopes and dreams for the bookstore in the near future?
I want to make one good thing. Like, I hear people talking about, oh, we'll get a second location or we'll do whatever. I always say we have 1.5 bookstores between our store and the truck. Yeah. And I'm like, I just want one good thing. I want us to last. I want us to be able to keep doing the various community-oriented things. Like, I really care about the accessibility of ownership, so I try and keep our price point really low. I try and buy, we do secondhand as well. I just think one good thing that lasts and can help anchor a neighborhood and prevent it from being overrun with offices and Dollaramas that's what I want. Totally. I love that.
Okay, we're going to quickly move to the Q&A, but before we get there, I'd like to share that Penguin Random House Canada is doing a $100 gift card giveaway for you to shop online at Iron Dog Books, and we'll be sharing the link. It's probably already there in the chat box, so be sure to check that out and enter for your chance to win. It is there now. Lovely. And so I saw one question. Okay, so Hilary, you said that you want things in your store that people need. Mm-hmm. So what are 3 books that you think everyone needs to read right now?
I think they need to read Aviak Johnson's horror anthology, Talk to Me. That's Taaqtumi, not, like, I don't have the right accent, so it sounds like I'm saying talk to me, but I'm not. I'm saying talk to me.
Right.
Yeah. Just mostly because, it is a piece of Indigenous work that is so far outside of what anybody expects Indigenous people to be producing. Totally. I love it. And they should read Billy-Ray's book. No, they should read your book, though. It is legit good. 2 other really essential books that people need. I think my problem with answering this question is the right person, right place, right book, or right person, time, right book. Like, I don't know, maybe, like, what do you need right now, Billy-Ray? Maybe we should do that. Like, You know, like, what are you in the mood to read?
Right. Well, I just got the arc of Brian Washington's Memorial, queer Black writer out of the U.S. His first book, Lot, was so incredibly good. Very, very queer. About people of color, queer people of color in particular. The whole, continuum of emotions of our lives. And I think, whenever I see a book like that, or a writer who attends, who's ambitious enough to attend to all of those things, that the book really becomes an experience of, something that feels deeply human and encompassing. And so I think, this is a book that I need right now.
Yeah. There is such a proliferation. I mean, I look at all the stuff that Arsenal's done. There's such a proliferation of really interesting, good queer writing, but like you're saying, it's getting more and more with the bigger publishers, but also is this underground with some of the smaller publishers that's just super exciting. Like I really love Little Fish.
Right.
And I mean, I love also Kai Cheng Tom. Like everything she does is just so amazing. So her picture book. So yeah, anyway, I could see, for you, how this is speaking to you, especially in this moment when like your book is about to come out in Canada and you're a part of this diaspora of like BIPOC queer folk.
Totally.
Yeah.
Totally. There's a really cute question here, which is, do you, Hilary, have a favorite bookstore from a movie and or a book?
Oh, I have a favorite library. I really think I'm a big nerd, and I really love sci-fi, and I really love Terry Pratchett a lot. And I think that the way he writes about libraries as folding space-time, and every book is in, there's this one library at the university in his books, and every book is in that library. And so if you just walk far enough and down the right angles, and they're all kind of alive. And I mean, in his books, it's literally true, but I actually think that that's how I feel about all bookstores and all libraries, is that they are folding space-time, and you're fitting, right? You're fitting so many worlds into this one tiny area.
I totally see that.
Yeah.
Okay, and perhaps lastly, someone has asked, how have your reading habits changed since the pandemic started? And perhaps maybe you could also, zoom this out to, book selling. How's that, if you wanted to go there as well?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I'm also curious about how your reading habits have changed since the pandemic, especially because your professorship, are you teaching now?
Yeah. So I had my first class this started in January.
Yeah. I mean, that's just like a ridiculous amount of work and so much reading for teaching,
Yeah. Totally.
Yeah.
And with teaching, I definitely felt like it was useful to have like that there was it was mandatory for me as a prof who assigned these mandatory readings to also read them. So that became, the ebb and flow of my reading. And, since the pandemic hit, after my classes ended, things have been definitely a lot more unpredictable and hectic. And I have, been able to read some books, but definitely not with the same degree of concentration or expediency as before.
Yeah, I think that really reflects, because I read mostly for the store now, and have done for the last few years, especially before I had staff and it was just me in the truck. I was constantly reading so that I would know what was the right book for the right human, because you can make a guess from the outside. I actually saw a Jeff Vandermeer book come in, and it was like perfect for fans of Neil Gaiman and Patrick Rothfuss. So I was like, there's no way this book is anything like those two authors' books. Like this blurb is, like it's just not helpful for who I'm going to sell the book to. I have to kind of get into it and wade through it myself. But since the pandemic started, I really have struggled. Like I've struggled with that type of reading where like I'm not necessarily reading it for me. I'm reading it. I mean, I'm reading it so that I know the type of human who needs that book. And so I gave myself permission maybe like 6 weeks ago to just escape read. And I read Martha Wells's new Murderbot book, which is it's just a Torah joint. And man, if you want to read great queer writing, you should, that's in sci-fi, like you should read the Murderbot series. It's amazing. It's just
thank you.
So nerdy and good.
So good. Okay, well, I think that's all the time we have. So for Indie Feature Friday today. So thank you again, Hilary. I really do wish you the best. And for anyone that joined us a bit late, again, this was Hilary Atleo from Iron Dog Books, an Indigenous-owned bookshop and book truck dedicated to bringing low-cost reading to Tsleil-Waututh, Squamish, and Musqueam territories in Vancouver. The link to Iron Dog Books is in the chat, so be sure to check out their online store. Penguin Random House Canada will continue to spotlight a Canadian bookstore every Friday leading up to Canadian Independent Bookstore Day at the end of August, so be sure to follow along at #IndieFeatureFriday for upcoming events. See you next week for a different author and a different bookstore. Take care. And see you, Hilary.
See you, Billy-Ray. It was really nice talking to you again.
Really, likewise.